Living as we do, on what is, as hard as it may be to believe, the first anniversary of Donald Trump in power, we find ourselves caught in a quarrel between Trump optimists and Trump pessimists, and one proof of how right the Trump pessimists have been is that the kind of thing that the Trump optimists are now saying ought to make you optimistic. Basically, their argument amounts to the claim that the stock market remains up, the government isn't suspended, and the president's critics aren't in internment camps. In the pages of The Economist, as in the columns of The Times, one frequently reads some form of this not very calming reassurance: Trump may be an enemy of Republican government, and a friend to tyrants, while alienating our oldest friends in fellow democracies, but while he may want to be a tyrant, he isn't very good at being one. This is the Ralph Kramden account of Trumpism. He blusters and threatens and shakes and rages, but Alice, like the American people, just stands there and shrugs him off sardonically. Those in the Trump pessimist camp are inclined to point out not only that the final score is not in yet, but that the game has only just started. In real life, as opposed to 50s sitcoms, the Ralph Kramdens tend to act on their instincts. Trump's Justice Department has already reopened an investigation of his political opponent, after he loudly demanded it, itself a chilling abuse of power. And if, as seems probable, Trump tries to fire Robert Mueller, the special counsel on the Russia investigation, we will be in the midst of a crisis of extreme dimensions. But, even in the absence of overt criminality, Trump pessimists may also point to how degraded our discourse has already become, how the processes variously called normalization, or acceptance, or just silent stunned disbelief go on. We know that Trump fired James Comey, the FBI director, because he wanted him to stop investigating contacts between members of Trump's campaign and Russia, and Trump announced this fact in public, despite having had subordinates come up with more plausible-sounding rationales for him to cling to. And surely no one can doubt that, had Hillary Clinton become president and, say, a meeting had then been discovered to have taken place between members of her campaign and a mysterious visitor from an autocratic foreign power offering information designed to subvert democracy, with an accompanying email from Chelsea Clinton saying, "Love it," we would now be in the midst of Clinton's impeachment hearings, with a supposedly liberal press defending her faintly, if at all. Meanwhile, the insults to democratic practice continue. In any previous administration, reports that the resident of the White House had paid off a porn star to be silent about an alleged affair would be a defining, and, probably, president-ending, scandal. With Trump, Stormy Daniels hardly registers at all as a figure, so dense and thick on the ground are the outrages and the indignities, so already bizarre is the cast of characters. It's as if we have been watching some newly discovered season of The Sopranos, what with the mooch and sloppy Steve, who now can even quite recall poor Sean Spicer. Worse still, in a sense, is the degradation of memory that this circus enforces. Not long ago, Bret Stephens, who left the Wall Street Journal for the Times and has been an admirable mainstay of the anti-Trumpist movement among conservatives, wrote a touching piece about his father, and the decency of the values that he exemplified, especially when it came to the treatment of women, in the workplace and outside it. Our culture could sorely use a common set of ideas about male decorum and restraint in the 21st century, along with role models for those ideas. Stephens wrote, "Who, in the age of Trump, is teaching boys why not to grope, even when they can, even when you can do anything?" But nowhere did Stephens acknowledge that, less than a year ago, America did have, in President Barack Obama, a near-perfect model of male decorum and restraint, who in his own behavior and words taught boys how to be men who honored and respected women. The point is not that what Obama did was necessarily always admirable, but that amnesia about even the very recent past has become essential to the most decent conservative politics only by making the national emergency general and cross-party can it be fully shared rather than, as it should be, localized to the crisis of one party and its ideology. In plain English, it becomes necessary to spread the smell around so that everyone gets some of the stink on them. This is why we have to read so much undue hand-wringing about our national crisis and civic values and family piety rather than recognize the abandonment of Republican values that began when the mainstays of the Conservative Party decided to embrace Trump instead of, as their French equivalents had done, when confronted with the same choice between an authoritarian nationalist and a moderate centrist, reject him. It is always appealing rhetorically to insist that all of us are at fault. We're not. The attempts to pretend that the Trump era is part of some national, or even planetary, crisis, stretching out from one end of the political spectrum to the other, obscures the more potent reality. Had Mitt Romney and the Bushes not merely protested, or grumbled in private, about Trump but openly endorsed Hillary Clinton as the necessary alternative to the unacceptable, we might be living in a different country. For that matter, if during the past year, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell had summoned patriotism in the face of multiple threats to the norms of democratic conduct, then we might not be in this mess. They didn't, and we are. Needless to say, the degradation of public discourse, the acceleration of grotesque lying, the legitimization of hatred and name-calling, are hard to imagine vanishing like the winter snows that Trump thinks climate change is supposed to prevent. The belief that somehow all these things will somehow just go away in a few years' time does seem not merely unduly optimistic but crazily so. In any case, the trouble isn't just what the Trumpists may yet do, it is what they are doing now. American history has already been altered by their actions, institutions emptied out, historical continuities destroyed, traditions of decency savaged, in ways that will not be easy to rehabilitate. And yet there are grounds for optimism. Institutions may crumble, but more might yet be saved. Restoration may be no more than 2 good elections and a few steady leaders away, as long as the foundational institutions of democracy, really, no more than fair voting and counting, but no less than those, either, remain in place. Political results are far more often contingent than overdetermined, much more to do with accident and personality than with irresistible tides of history. This is what makes them controllable. After all, not long ago a rational woman won the popular vote for president, rather easily, and only a bad electoral system prevented her from taking office. Part of the power of tyrants and would-be tyrants is to paralyze our self-confidence. The famous underground societies of the Eastern European countries, built under Soviet tyranny, were exercises not in heroism but in normalcy. We like this music, this food, these books, and no one can tell us what to think about them. What has happened is worse than we want to pretend. But it happened for highly specific and contingent causes, and the means of remedying them have not yet passed. Meanwhile, our primary obligation may be simply not to blind ourselves to the facts, or to compromise our values in a desperate desire to embrace our fellow citizens. Any anti-Trumpist movement must consist of the broadest imaginable coalition, but it cannot pretend that what we're having is a normal national debate. The reason people object, for instance, to the Times running a full page of Trump-defending letters is not that they want to cut off or stifle that debate, it is because the implication that Trumpism is a controversial but acceptable expression of American values within that debate is in itself a betrayal of those values. Liberal democracy is good. Authoritarian nationalism is bad. That's the premise of the country. It's the principle that a lot of people died for. Americans never need to apologize for the continuing absolutism of their belief in it.